Here we are with the next chapter in the 1967 Chevy Impala Supernatural build. Alright, we're going to be looking at the chassis and the front suspension. The front suspension is a multi-piece setup. Actually, it's pretty nicely detailed. And with a few little paint applications, gives you a nice representation of the front suspension. It's got a sway bar. Here you can see the springs. I highlighted the coils on the springs just to make it a little more visually interesting. Added a little bit of paint to all the fittings, tops of the ball joints, so that it's not all black in there. Makes it like it's a little more visually interesting. One of the interesting aspects of the front suspension is that you can build it to give you posable steering. As you can see here, the spindles do move. It's almost as if they had intended to give it posable steering and then change their minds. As the tie rod do have, instead of just being your regular kit, they actually do hook up and can be used to position both wheels side to side. Now, in order to get this to work, you will have to modify the suspension, as the tie rods have these two arms which have to slide in underneath the control arms. Let's see if I can give you a good look at that here. They have to slide in underneath the control arms and then attach to the spindles. Now, sitting under the control arms limits their movement from side to side. So you can still get a bit of steering angle change. Let's see if I can show you. Okay, here we have the tie rods connected to the spindles. And as it is, you can get a little bit of steering movement out of it before the arms are blocked on the tie rods by the control arms. Now, the simple answer is just to cut those arms off of the tie rods. Here you can see them. If you cut these off, then you can have the full motion of the steering back and forth. Now, the only other issue you run into is actually keeping the tie rods attached to the arms, as the pins that they sit on the spindles are too short. Hold on. We'll be right back. Okay, now the pins that the tie rods attached to on the spindles are not tall enough so that you can modify them to keep the tie rods in place. On both sides, you can see they just sit flush with the tie rods. So I'm going to have to work on something there, because I do want to build it with the posable steering. So I will probably be cutting those arms off of the entire steering assembly so that they'll rotate back and forth. It will be limited movement due to the engine being in place. As you can see how the rod is bent to go around the engine. But it should still give you some nice posability. Just have to figure out what I'm going to do about keeping the tie rod on the spindle. And other than that, that is the entire front suspension assembly. Again, nicely detailed. Next, I'll be working on the rear. The chassis itself also very nicely detailed, full chassis. They did a good job with that. One quick note on the rear is that the rear axle, again, they filled with this car with all sorts of hidden details, so that inside the rear diff, you can actually see a bit of detail that they put in there. Something you'll never see unless you want to build this car as a work in progress. in a garage diorama or so. Just like the engine, they included interior parts which would make it for interesting display. So this car is would be a good one to put in a garage diorama under all sorts of repair work. Okay, oh, one other thing before we end this video. The front sway bar, the way it's shown here, it's not very clear as to how you have to install that. You're actually going to have to go in from one side to the other. You're going to have to go under the control arm and then out under the other control arm. I mean, not the control arm, the, let's see if I can point this out a little bit better here. The sway bar has to pass underneath this part of the subframe and then underneath this part of the subframe, and then gets glued to each side of the chassis. If you look at the instructions here, it looks almost like they're just telling you just to place it there. It's not going to work. You have to slide it in from one side over through the other side. Just to clear up any confusion anyone may have with this. Okay. And that's it for this video. See you on the next one.